Welcome to Module 3. In this module, we'll learn about public opinion and topics in public opinion, public policy, how we make decisions. To start off with, we'll start with voting. So, let's talk about suffrage and voting. Why is voting a right? What is access to polls? What is the challenge to voting rights and access to polls, and why is this subject relevant to us today? So, starting at the beginning, in the United States, we have popular sovereignty. And popular sovereignty means we, the people, are in charge of ruling. But how do we make our decisions? Through representatives. This is called a republican form of government. Therefore, these representatives that we choose make critical and important decisions. Whether those decisions have to do with masking laws, gun laws, family laws, tax laws, okay? And their decisions influence and impact us. And the main way in which we select these representatives is through the vote. And so voting is a fundamental article in our Constitution. This is echoed by James Madison, the founding father, Federalist Papers, fourth president, Constitution, Bill of Rights, amongst many other things that he contributed to the nation. He states, "The right of suffrage is a fundamental article in Republican constitutions. The regulation of it is at the same time a matter of peculiar delicacy. Allow it exclusively to property, and the rights of the people may be oppressed, or persons. Extend it equally to all, and the rights of property may be overruled with those without property." Now, what is James Madison saying here? He's telling us that America is indeed a balanced system between economic, political, state elites and the people. All right? And so when we say we the people, it constitutes this idea also, elite and the popular. And where do we see this exhibited today? For example, the Electoral College. The Electoral College votes directly for the president in December 15th, while we vote in November. And they mostly vote as good faith electors, but they can also vote against the will of the people. Another thing that we see is until 1913, with the 17th Amendment, that there was no constitutional amendment giving the clarity that Americans chose their senators directly. So at the founding of the nation, the only place in government that Americans truly chose directly was the House of Representatives. So there's a balance between elite and the popular, and Madison reminds us of this. Now, voting is your formal expression for a candidate or a proposal, okay? And we can therefore ask, what is a right? Your rights are your entitlements as being a member of a society, okay? And among these are your legal rights. Now, just before even I get there, rights are not absolute, right? They're qualified. They are not unlimited. And therefore, while the right to vote is granted to all Americans, it is qualified by age, right? It is qualified by, you can be a felon. It is qualified even on whether a person may be declared mentally having the inability to make certain crucial decisions, like voting, right? So you have these legal rights because you move from the state of nature, tacitly or explicitly joined a civic reality, and in this civic space you have legal rights, and among your legal rights are your civic and political rights, and among your political rights is representation, the right to vote, the right to run for office, etc. Now, first, why is voting a right? Because you're a member of this society, and it is protected in the Constitution. The vast number of amendments in the American Constitution have to do, or the federal Constitution, have to do with suffrage. Whether we're talking about 14th, 15th, whether we're talking about the 17th, 25th, 19th, 22nd, 23rd, 26th, 24th, a lot of things that have to do with protecting a republic and how people are chosen. So it's important from the founding fathers to current times that the right of Americans to choose their government in a way that provides this balance is maintained. Okay? Now, just because I've given you a right doesn't mean you have the agency, the ability to exercise and enjoy that right. And as you know, my example of giving you a gift card to a store. But imagine I'm giving you a gift card for a store that is in another state that you have to get on a plane and fly over to use. I've given you something, but it is unusable. Kind of like the title of North Korea, the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, whereas a lot of people might challenge the idea of them being a democracy or a republic or belonging to the people. Right? And so, while even the right to vote was granted to all men in the 1870, or the right of all Americans or women and men in by 1920s, we can find that doesn't mean necessarily everybody enjoyed this right across the country. So we must grant or provide conditions that are necessary to enjoy this right. We're talking about things like location. Yeah, are you able to easily travel and find a place of voting? We're talking about understanding membership. Who's allowed to vote? And how is membership determined? Do I need to come with my ID or not? Or what are my qualifications to be understood to be a member? To understand the process of voting, the times, the notices, the dates, right? It can be language, right? You can come from a bilingual state like Texas, where we have both Spanish and English speakers and providing both languages at the ballot. And then safety. We don't want neighborhood intimidation. We don't want safety issues, right? We don't want people to show up with AR-15s and other intimidations at the polling booth, so people can feel that the vote was free and the vote was fair. And so why is this a challenge for us today, and why has it been a challenge historically? The paradox or the irony is that the primary violator over time of this particular right of suffrage has also been the one who's been given the constitutional right to protect this right. And exactly who is that? So, according to the Constitution, Article 1, Section 4, the state's legislatures determine the times, manner, and ways of voting or manner of voting in their particular states for all positions. Furthermore, Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution tells us that the state legislatures also choose the electors by the whole number of representatives they have in Congress. So the states stand squarely on matters election, from creating the electoral districts amongst many other things. So in that way, we can see that states are in charge, but historically we have seen that states are also the ones who have repressed or controlled this right. And so you can have different experiences. People from certain states have the ability to mail in their votes or have drop-off boxes where they can drop off their votes, and they're picked up or they're mailed and they're counted. While in other states that is repressed, and therefore you have to show up to the polling booth, right? And that can also be different in a state, county by county. So you can take Collin County, where we had to almost like a Scantron shade for proposals and for candidates. While you can Dallas County or Tarrant County, they had computers. So even by county, the voting experience can be different for Americans. And so when you look at the history of America, it's always been, or suffrage has been at the center of pivotal moments in whether you're talking about the beginning, representation without taxation, all right? And that generation with Lord North of England refusing to listen to the Americans, Samuel Adams and the Boston Tea Party, Cypress Atticus with the Boston Massacre, the cause of freedom centered at the right of suffrage. Unfortunately, some of the people who fought and participated and died did not get the enjoyment, mostly in the African American community. So at the founding of the nation, as Madison said, it was a matter of peculiar delicacy. If you did not meet certain criteria, you did not enjoy the suffrage rights or political rights. Mostly you have to be in a couple of categories: white, a male, a man, and possibly be a landowner or a property owner, right? So that is exhibited even in Texas, where we are, whether it was a time when we became our own country, independent country, to the point that we joined the Union, to the point that we were in the Confederacy. Through all those periods, suffrage was also controlled within that guise, all right? Then we move about 100 years later, and things shift. So we're talking about the Civil War, or post-Civil War amendments. 13th Amendment ends slavery. 14th Amendment creates citizenship for anybody born or naturalized in this nation. And it also grants equal treatment under the same law, right? Civil rights. And then 15th Amendment grants voting for all men. Now, what it actually says is that citizens of the United States, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Now, servitude in the Constitution is AKA slavery, right? Continuous contentious, one of the most contentious issues in American history, right? And so we see a new generation, whether we're talking about, this was Abraham Lincoln's time, Ulysses Grant, who would end up becoming a president, was a general. But there are other groups of people who are now enjoying these rights. We're looking at Joseph Rainey of South Carolina, one of the first two persons to be elected in office who were non-white categorized. Whether you're talking about Thomas Moody Peterson of New Jersey, the first non-white person, an African-American gentleman in New Jersey who got to vote. And so changes are happening in the nation, right? Now, these changes are not happening organically. We have to understand that the Democrats in the South have been beaten under the Civil War. The Union Army is down and has occupied the South, and this is a time of Reconstruction. And the Republicans are in charge of Southern governments, right? And so it's not by choice or it's not by organically, it is by force, right? And unfortunately, in some places like Texas, the Republicans or the Republican governor was a bit corrupt. And so in that regard, the biggest headache to this new changes occurs with the Southerners, right? They're looking at the current situation, right? Remember, who gets to vote makes decisions on the future of the nation. And what is the probability that people you've held in human trafficking conditions would vote alongside or support your policies, right? And so there's a reaction to all these changes. Enter in the election of 1877-78. In 1877-1878, a gentleman called Tilden, a Democrat, is winning. At this point, he has 184 electoral votes. Second is Rutherford B. Hayes, the vice president to Ulysses Grant, right? He has 165 votes, and these are the electoral votes that select the president. There are 20 outstanding electoral votes, and they're in Oregon and 3 southern states, Florida, South Carolina, and Louisiana. And remember, the South at this point is a Democrat. So from that count, the Democrats should win. Tilden only needs 1 electoral vote, and Hayes cannot catch up, while Hayes needs the whole 20 outstanding votes to beat Tilden by 1 vote. Now, you have to take in mind what was going on at the time. The Republicans control the military. The Republicans control the Supreme Court. The Republicans are in charge of many areas of government, and the South doesn't have self-rule. And therefore, they even probably project that Hayes may refuse the outcome. So in Wormwood Hotel in Washington, D.C., they come up with a compromise. They tell Hayes, we will actually tell our electors to give you all our electoral votes. You will take the entire 20. We will make you the President of the United States. However, in turn, you must remove the Union Army. You must give the South self-rule again and allow us or let us to run our affairs as we see fit. Now, what does Hayes say? Sure, I will take that compromise. Now, What happened after was 100 years of really hellish experience for minorities in the South, especially the African American community. All right? And remember, it's the reaction to all the protections and the rights they got in the 14th and the 15th Amendments. And so we have literacy tests, right? If you cannot read adequately, you don't get to vote. So how many people newly freed from slavery or poor will have access to public education in this regard? Poll taxes affecting the poor. If you can't pay poll taxes, you can't vote. And most egregious, grandfather clauses. If you were not grandfathered to the election, to the voting process, before you had the right to vote, you don't get to vote. So if you're not grandfathered by 1866, 1867, when the right to vote of the 15th Amendment came in 1870, you don't get to vote. And so this repressed this large group of emancipated people from participating in Southern politics. All right? And if you met all the criteria that were trying to come against you, unfortunately, you had the KKK, you had the Redeemers. So lynchings, cross burnings, you had entire towns of African American businesses and banks that were wiped out and burned down. And so this was 100 years of unfortunate misery that transpired after the 1877-1878 compromise. Now we move forward in time around in the 1900s, and a couple of changes happen. In 1913, 17th Amendment, Americans now can vote directly for their senators. 1915, finally, grandfather clauses are found to be unconstitutional. How can you take away the constitutional right of people to vote when you claim they were not grandfathered in the process? Remember the supremacy clause of the Constitution. The 1920, 19th Amendment, there is clearly no reason to bar women based on their sex from participating politically and in the vote. So women have the right to vote. And then 1924 Indian Citizens Act, where First Nations, Native Americans who were being, where originally it was found that they didn't have the right to participate in American politically, that they actually had the right to vote in a nation that affected their outcomes, right? And so that all those changes are happening in America in the area of suffrage. And now 100 years from 1860s, 1870s, we enter the civil rights era, right? Starting in the 50s, climbing into the 60s. And so the 24th Amendment, poll taxes are declared unconstitutional. Another barrier to voting falls. Civil Rights Bill, of course, 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965 comes in. And all this is to push back discrimination. In fact, the Voting Rights Act had a coverage formula where certain states couldn't change their election rules without first meeting certain criteria, amongst which would be going to a DC Circuit Court judge. And then we hit the 1970s, and the age of voting across the nation is now 18, following the Vietnam draft, where if you're old enough to fight for the country, you ought to be old enough to vote for the people who are sending you to these foreign wars. And then we move forward to the 1990s, where other groups are getting enjoyment of voting. We're talking about Americans with disabilities. We are talking about expanding registration and making registration easy, so you can register at the DMVs and at your county level government offices. And then technology in the 2000s, in 2002, where we expand technology and improve on technology to make voting even more efficient in the country. So with all that, why is this topic relevant to us today? It's because there are two schools of thought. One is electoral safeguarding, and the other is voter suppression. One group says that we are protecting the vote, like the new Save America Act. We put more stringent requirements to have people prove that they're Americans, to prove that they have the right to vote. And so all these are coming by people who are saying they're protecting the right to vote, right? Reducing mail-in votes and ballot boxes and force people to go to the polls. All of this is part of electoral safeguarding. While there's another group that says we are moving into a time of voter suppression. One of the things they said is the removal of the coverage part of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, where they said by removing that coverage, you are as a court, where certain states had to show why they're making the electoral changes, that you're giving states more power to be discriminatory in the future. But those states argued they were being treated differently than other states, which according to the Constitution, all states should be treated equally under the Constitution, and those states won. The other thing is gerrymandering, how to legally steal an election, right? So just because you don't have a numerical majority doesn't mean you cannot draw electoral districts to give you a win. And so there is this argument that we're entering a time in America where there'll be extreme gerrymandering, right? I.e., there was a discussion on Texas where we create 5 more seats for one particular party, when before those seats did not were not leaning in the other way. And so that is artificial, right? And so the argument is the representatives are choosing us before we ever choose them. And so we can see this. The other group are prisoners and felons. The question is, should prisoners have the right to vote for the chief executive, at least, of this nation? There are those who argue no, based on English common law and culture and history. And so there's that argument, right? Or maybe they're bad people, so they shouldn't vote. While some say it should depend on the type of crime, right, that one has committed, right? But what is significant is per capita and by numbers, America is at the top of the world of the most prisoners. We have over 2 million people, and we are, I think, 5 or 6 on the list per capita on the average American being imprisoned. And so in that regard, we have a very high population of people behind bars, possible wastage of public funds in this regard, but those people are not participating in the selection process of the nation. And so we've seen that as a citizen, this is your right to vote. It's protected in the Constitution, all right? And we enter a time where the states are maybe manipulating the election process to keep those political and those elite interests, economic and political elite interests, protected, while the people are maybe more controlled and lose the ability to make decisions. Next, so that is voting. And why is voting a right? And that is voting and why voting is a right. Now, welcome as we now talk about elections and the election process in the United States. Elections and campaigns. Now, there are different types of elections in the United States. We have partisan and non-partisan elections. Partisan means pertaining to 2 factions or 2 parties in a political contest. Non-partisan means something that pertains to only one party. So a primary election is a non-partisan election because you're choosing candidates from within your party who are going to represent your party. So a primary election is a part of an election within a party. Therefore, it's non-partisan. All right? Local elections are also non-partisan in that people who are running for local government council don't declare allegiance to any party. You just have a list of people. And so we have partisan, non-partisan elections, right? And citizens in the United States vote for many levels of government. We have 90,888 government entities across the United States, from the federal government to the state governments, to the county governments, to the townships, to the municipal towns and cities, right? And to the special districts, to the ISDs, right? And so we get to vote for many, many positions in the United States. Of course, you have to be qualified as a citizen and follow the rules that your state has created. Now, to run elections, we run elections through political parties. Political parties are not in the Constitution, but they are electoral organizations that seek to control government. They are highly organized. They seek out supporters, right? They're organized actually from the county level or sections of the county called precincts to the county or the district and to the state, right? They are called linkage institutions. In other words, any institution that links the people with the government is called a linkage institution, or the politicians. Media is also a linkage institution. They create a party list. Most of the times, as you know, we don't choose the people who we show up to vote for. The party recruits, the party creates that party list, right? They help contest, they keep accountability among their members, and they set agendas on what the party stands for. So they ran through these political parties. Now, party competition in America may be divided into three areas. Number one, ideology. Ideology can guide you to which party you go to, right? Ideas are power, right? They're the guiding, they lead to principles, and those principles lead to laws, and those laws lead to institutions, right? Systems of beliefs about the nature of society and the relationship in which the government should have with its people, with morality, right? And with the economy, amongst many interests, amongst many areas. Now, another way in which people choose parties is through interests. Interest may have something to do with ideology, but your interest may not be within your ideology. As I like to say, you have many migrant communities that are way more conservative in family values, even in business, than the typical American. But you'll find that their interest in immigration or ethnicity may align with a more liberal party, right? So you can find their voting in one party while the ideology lies in another party. Finally, party identification. Party identification, as I always like to joke, is like a Cowboys fan. Sorry to the Cowboys fans. Is a psychological and cultural orientation for long-term propensity to think positively and vote regularly for a particular party. So your grandfather was part of the party, your father was a part of the party, and so you are part of the party. You're ingrained into the system, and it's always your ear to win, right? And so in that regard, party ID is how many of us revert to later, especially later in life. Most people end up becoming like their parents. And so when we talk about the American party model, it's called the rational party model versus the responsible party model. The rational party model, the way I like to think about it, is like a vehicle, right? In America, we have two buses, and you choose one bus, right? These two vehicles, their job is to control government. And so you have the left with covering so many ideologies and so many interests, or the right with so many interests and so many ideologies, right? And the main goal is party discipline to control government. While the responsible party model is there's a major distinction from one party to another. These are called multi-party democracies, where you find a plethora of different parties, each one with a specific issue area. It can be the Labour Party. It can be the Democratic Socialist Party. It can be the Liberal Party. It just different parties, each being very responsible with a defined, their discipline is to policy rather than just to party, right? And then they come together to form government when they have a common interest. Now, the next thing in terms of these elections and political parties is they have to run campaigns. Now, campaigns are the process, campaigns are the process in which we socialize, influence, and recruit citizens towards a candidate or an issue, right? So we all get politically socialized, and we'll talk about that soon. First thing to note is campaigns are very expensive. Take, for example, if you want to run for a Senate seat, a federal Senate seat in Texas. For the incumbent, you're going to pay about $40 million, or it's going to cost you about $40 million. For the person contesting, it might cost $80 million, right? So elections are expensive, and that brings in interest groups that we'll talk about later. So when you're campaigning, you can follow several strategies. A party-centered approach, right? Simply put, I know I live in a county that is very red. Therefore, all I need to do is win the nonpartisan election, the primary, and I'm pretty much a shoo-in for that position. It can be issue-oriented, right? Maybe it's a competitive district, so I'm running on health, or I'm running on economy or security, etc. Once in a while, you may have an image-oriented approach. In other words, somebody is so charismatic, so magnanimous. You're talking about Trump, you're talking about Obama, whose image can rise above the party, and they run off their image. But in turn, there can be an anti-image approach where people run an election against the image of such person, whether it's Obama, whether it's an anti-Trump campaign, right? So those are ways in which we can have strategies, but in addition to that is to understanding battleground states, right? Those are states that can swing left or right. Fundraising, clearly it's expensive. Learning how to debate, not making major messes, and learning how to make quick and important speeches. Now, we have different, as we said, different types of elections: primaries, general election, midterm election, local elections. Let me talk about primaries. In the primary elections, there's the majority rule of voting. In other words, in a primary election, you must win 50% plus 1 of all cast votes. If nobody wins over 50 plus votes, then you go to a runoff election with the two top candidates, in which whoever has the most votes wins, right? Of course, you have to check your state's rules, or rather your party rules in your state, right? And so then you move on to the general election, right? That's when the president runs, or the midterm election, which is 2 years in to the president's time in office, right? So general election, first Tuesday after the first Monday in the even number of years in November, right? And in a general election or midterm election, once you have won your primary, you're representing your party, then it's the plurality rule. You move from the majority rule to the plurality rule. The plurality rule means I just have to have more votes than you, even if I don't have over 50% of cast votes. All right. Now, something to note with midterm elections, right? Midterm elections, most statewide offices, by statewide offices, we're talking about people who represent the state or are voted in by the entire state and represent a state. You're talking about governors, lieutenant governors, attorney generals, Supreme Court justices in the case of Texas. And so these type of positions run during the midterms in order to thwart or to diminish the coattail effect. In other words, if I'm a governor or a lieutenant governor, and I'm running the same time with a popular president, the people who will show up to vote for this president more likely will vote for the same governor who's in that president's party. So to diminish that, I'm going to run 2 years, the midterm elections, after the president. And so that is the midterm elections. Now, of course, members of the House run for election every 2 years, and a third of senators are up for election every 2 years. And as we've said, primaries are non-partisan. You can have a closed primary where you have to declare to be a member of the party before you show up to the elections. Semi-open primary, depending on the state, where you can wait until primary election date to decide. And then just an open primary where you don't have to declare. All right? Take, for example, in Texas, when you show up to the voting booth, you're asked which ballot do you want in a primary. Are you going to vote as a Democrat? Are you going to vote as a Republican in the Republican Party primary? So you can't vote in both. You choose one or the other at the ballot, and you therefore participate in their party's primary. Okay, and when it comes to the President of the United States, on the Super Tuesday, March 3rd, in March is when we see all these states running their primaries for who will be the President of the United States. All right, so let's quickly look at the process of becoming the President of the United States, which is a long process. It's not just when people show up to vote in November. A lot of things have transpired before then. So let's quickly look at that. So when you're running to be the President of the United States, first you have to win your party's primary, right? There's several people who also want to be the Democratic candidate for president or the Republican candidate for president. The first step is that they all have to win delegates, all right? So in each state's primary, you're getting delegates, right? And so if you take certain states, there's 2 states, Iowa and New Hampshire, that do caucuses. Caucuses is like the townspeople meet in the school gym, and if they all organize themselves, and if you have at least 15 people in your, you get at least a delegate, starting from the precinct levels of the counties, right? You make your way up to county, to the state, to determine how many delegates you got from that particular state. All right, and so the bar is at least 15% for you to move forward in getting delegates. Right now, for the rest of this country, of the states in the United States, in a primary, you vote just the same way as you vote in a general election. You show up to a polling place, you vote, and by percentages, people win delegates from those states. That's why you see them having those debates. Because when they're having those debates, they're hoping people in different states recognize them, show up to the primaries, vote for their names, and the more votes I get, the more delegates I get, right? So who are the delegates? There are 3,979 Democratic delegates proportioned across the United States based on the population of the state. While in the Republican Party, there are 2,472 delegates spread across, again, the United States. Now, every time we are voting, delegates should be thought of almost like electors, right? And so while the Democrats are voting, they're voting for these delegates. So the higher my results, the more delegates I get from that particular state. Again, I must get over 50% of the delegates on my side to be declared the due representative of my party for the position of the United States president, right? And so all these delegates meet at the National Convention, whether the Republican National Convention, Democratic National Convention, and they vote, and whoever has over 51% becomes. Now again, if you don't get over 51%, you go for a runoff election, as we saw with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, right? And different rules may apply. In this case, in the Democratic Party, you have other voters who join the runoffs, called the super delegates, who are like party elites, and those ones voted for Hillary Clinton, and therefore a lot of people were annoyed during that time period. But what also happens at this convention, there'll be the party's manifesto and party issues will be discussed, right? So that's how the process of becoming the nominee, right? And then after you're the nominee, now you have to campaign more until now you go to the general election, where now the Democratic candidate faces the Republican candidate, and the American people cast their vote. Right? So the general election, the Tuesday after the next first Monday of the month of November. Now we vote, right? We are voting in November, and we are choosing the candidate who will be our president. What you actually are voting for is you're showing your will as the citizen, right? The balancing, right? But there's something called the Electoral College. The Electoral College came in during the Compromises when we were creating the Constitution. Now, in December 15th, there are 538 electoral votes in the United States. How do we come up with that number? It is the 435 members of Congress, right, who are proportionally spread across the United States based on your state's population. So in Texas, currently there are 38 positions in the House of Representatives given to Texas. Those are 38 members of the Electoral College. Plus, every state has at least 2 senators, making 40 electoral votes from Texas. Okay, so 435 plus 100 senators gives us 535. Now, there's a 23rd Amendment that gave Washington, D.C. 3 electoral votes. So the number goes to 538. Remember, Washington, D.C. is not a state, therefore they have no representatives. And the number of electoral votes in your state, or electors in your state, is determined by the number of people who represent you in Congress. So since they don't have, they were given 3 electoral votes. Now, the number is 538. To become the President of the United States, is the majority rule. You have to get over 50% of the votes, and the number is 270. Once you cross 270, you're declared the President of the United States of America. Now, in every state other than Maine and Nebraska, you take 100% of their electoral votes if you win that state, right, during elections, right? And so there's no proportion in this case, right? You don't get a proportion because you got 40% of the votes in Texas. No. Whoever won the majority of the votes in Texas takes 100%. Now, put that in mind that you do not have, the electors do not have to vote the will of the people, right? But most of the times they vote the will of the people, right? Just an interesting few dates, right? December 8th, the states certify the election results when the Americans vote. December 14th, not 15th, is voting day where the electors meet in their various state capitals and vote. Copies of those ballots are sent to the President of the Senate, who's the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and district judges in the places where they're voting. All right. Then December 23rd, all electoral ballots are received. January 6th, the President of the Senate counts all the ballots in front of Congress, the electoral ballots. And this is the Vice President of the United States. And whoever has the majority of the electoral votes, 50% plus 1, is declared the President of the United States. There is a situation in which nobody might get over 50%. In that case, the legislative branch will choose the president on behalf of the American people. And that is Thomas Jefferson versus Aaron Burr. That situation happened. Then, January 20th, the president is sworn in as the next president of the United States. So that is elections, campaigns, and how the process works in the United States of America at the federal level.